This is an overview of the final project for health psychology. I'm going to start by going over some of what I was hoping to accomplish in the first half of the porch, and I mean accomplish for you to be able to gain from the first half of this course. And then I'll describe each of the 4 projects and give you the details on how you will submit these. So your final project, as you know, is a 10-minute presentation about one of 4 topics. But let's start by going at what we were trying to do. So back about 2015, I had kind of my first sort of enlightenment or awakening into the bigger path, more of the spiritual path, the path that I think a lot of Navajo spiritual traditions encompass. And I didn't learn it through Navajo tradition. I hope to learn that now that I'm working with Navajo people, but I did learn it through a Buddhist tradition. And this quote, when I was meditating with a Sangha, the leader of the Sangha would read this every time we had a long meditation sit. And he had a very deep and profound voice that I wish I could offer you. But he would read this: "Life and death are of supreme importance. Time passes swiftly and opportunity is lost. Each of us should strive to awaken. Awaken. Take heed. Do not squander your life. Do not squander your life. Do not squander your life." And that sat with me and impacted me. And I link it to the quote below. It is a rare privilege to be born as a human being. We could be born as animal. We could be born as rock. It is a rare privilege to be born as human being. Each moment, time passes swiftly, and each moment of this life is this moment where we are walking in human form with all the privileges to make our choices and control our lives and manage everything. And so this, for me, felt empowering and wanted me to be aware at all times, to be aware and conscious of what I'm doing and what I'm thinking that is avoiding the squandering of this life. And the second quote about being born into this human body. This causes me to think of this body as the vessel of my awakening, of my spiritual growth, of my enlightenment. And if this is my vessel, and I need this vessel in order to awaken, that is, to become aware, to take advantage of the richness of this human existence, then I need to take care of my body. And that brought me to a place of being very heightened consciousness of everything about my body. For example, when I awoke in the morning, I would want to think carefully about what is the first food that I'm offering this body in order to begin the day. Am I aware of my body? Am I aware of what my hips are feeling right now? Do my hips need anything? Am I aware of what my stomach is doing? Am I aware of my digestion? Am I aware of the aggravation in my mind or the peace in my mind? Am I aware of what's around me in this beautiful world? Have I found the beauty inside of myself? And so how do we take care of the skin, this vessel in which we have this rare opportunity to walk through this human life? And this moved us on to considering things like this. Every human being is the author of his own health. Now, let's take this with a little bit of a grain of salt. We are born into a body that has predispositions to certain conditions and certain weaknesses that we can't control some of them. Maybe we're born with a genetic abnormality or something that is amiss with our bodies. And so this is not to suggest that everything that happens to you, every disease that you're exposed to, that somehow this is your fault. So let's walk away from that sort of interpretation, which would be completely in error. But let's think about what we can take away that's beneficial. Every human being is the author of his own health. And so all the things that we've covered in this course, in this first half, are things that we can control. But we have the potential to control. It may have much variation in terms of how easy it is for any one individual to control any one of those things. But these are things that potentially, with mindful awakening and gratitude for living in this body, that maybe we can learn to control. And so we talked about, we began by talking, I believe, about stress. And we can't control the external factors that give us stress, but we can control our reaction to it. And maybe we can control some things that give us stress that aren't necessary for us to be involved in. We talked about sleep. That's been a challenge for me at many times during my life. But we can do things to help control it. And those we talked about in our sleep chapter. We talked about food. And some things are out of our control. Like, I think if you live in what we sometimes call food deserts, and these are places often in big cities and maybe up in the Navajo Nation, I don't know what everyone has access to, but where you can't really have easy access to healthy, fresh foods that are grown in good ways, that kind of horror of the processed food industry has come in to infiltrate well-being and health. But we can have some control. We can be aware of our choices. We can avoid those foods that have all that high sodium and fat and sugar. We can try to learn to cook in new ways that use foods that are close to the earth that gives us everything. And we talked about other topics in similar ways: exercise, breath, things we can control. And so this brings us to some other quotes. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path. We have to take responsibility. Day by day we are born as night retires, no more possessing aught of our former life, estranged from our course of yesterday, and beginning today the life that remains. And so none of us have to look back and say, oh my gosh, look at all these mistakes I made. Oh my gosh. No. Don't waste a second on that. That is past. Learn from it and leave it. And so we, each day, wake up anew. And each day, we have a new body. Cells have died. Cells have reborn. New things have emerged. Each day we walk fresh. So have no regret for what we did in the past. That's a waste of your energy. But do think about the beauty of living in this body and what you can do to make this body the best vessel possible to awaken and give outward and offer to others. So that's my kind of inspirational talk for you, with these beautiful, beautiful quotes, often attributed to Buddha, but usually, since Buddha didn't write his words down, usually interpreted to an author who interpreted Buddha's teachings. Someday I'm going to have quotes like this from Navajo teachings. I just haven't learned enough yet. So let's go on and look at these projects. So project 1 and project, I changed the numbering a little bit from the syllabus because it made more sense this way when I was presenting it. So I'm writing now option 1 and option 2 as related to creating change. Option 1 is to implement your volition plan, to actually do that plan that you created. And so you would implement your plan, gather data, report on the results of your plan. Option 2 is a community health initiative proposal in which you would identify a community health issue that you think is really important and develop an initiative to invite change in the community. I'll talk more about each of these. And then the next 2 options were about more answering questions, digging deeper. And so option 3 is a deeper look. You would choose from a list of topics that I have on the next slide. and you would examine it more deeply, focusing on the psychological aspects of the health condition. And in option 4, you'd be looking at Navajo health. You'd be choosing a topic that maybe you think Navajo people face as a particular challenge and gather in-depth information about that. So let's go through these one at a time. On the yellow, I'm talking more about Plan 1, and then I have different colors for each of the 4 plans, so you can find it easily when you're going through this presentation. So to do this plan for option 1, you need to kind of get your act together, reread your behavior change plan so you know what you said you were going to be doing. Second, you'd need to determine what variable you're going to measure. So if your goal is to exercise more, well, what are you going to actually count? Minutes per day of walking, running, minutes spent in the gym, so figure that out. If your goal is to reduce meat, maybe you're going to count ounces of meat or poultry, excluding fish, that you eat per day. Be very specific. If your goal is to sleep more, maybe you're going to count the hours in bed in which you aren't having screens or books or doing anything else each day. Maybe you have an app that's going to measure your sleep. And then determine how you're going to record your data. Are you using pencil paper? How are you going to make sure you're accurate? How are you going to keep track of your pencil and paper? Are you going to write it on your phone in a note? Well, when are you going to do this? How are you going to make sure that you do it? And then you're going to gather data. You're going to collect baseline data. So you'd have to probably start right away, keep track of your current scores on your change variable. So if you're measuring exercise, well, before you start your intervention, how much are you exercising? Gather these data for a 1-week period. Then you're going to implement your plan. And then you're going to, during your implementation, keep gathering data. So that's what you do. Graphing your data, you're going to have something like this. And you will see on the next slide that I've made sort of an example, and a video link to that example will be on that page. And so you're going to gather your baseline data, days on the bottom here, a line chart. Your baseline data is before the intervention. Your subsequent data is after the intervention. The intervention is written up here, and you're going to have whatever it is you're counting, in this case frequency of disruptions, is going to be over here on the x-axis. So like this, just to tell you a little more if you are not familiar with line graphs. So on day 1, this person had 7 disruptions. On day 2, in the baseline stage, this person had 6 disruptions. At day 3, they had 7 again. Then this line indicates that the intervention began. This intervention was praise. This was an intervention for someone else. And on the first day of praise, this person had 4 interruptions. On day 5, which is the second praise day, there were 5 interruptions, and so forth. So these are the data that you're going to get. And on this next slide, I did talk about how you're going to create this nice graph that shows this. Option 2 is a community change project. Excuse me. You're going to choose an initiative, and this is the first page describing it. So first, you're going to identify a change that could improve health options in your community. Like, for example, maybe you would like to exercise more, but it's just hard because you have to go on roads, and couldn't we make some sort of a walking running trail? Example, plan to arrange community basketball games to take place on a regular schedule. So what's missing? What could be needed? Maybe you'd make a plan to develop a recreation area on an unused tract of land. Maybe you think there's not enough good organic vegetables and well cared for meats or something, and so you're going to plan a farmer's market. So you don't have to implement this one, but you'd be planning what you would do to implement it. Then you would identify 3 reasons why it would help the community. Then you'd make a plan to determine how community members feel about the data. So maybe you'd plan a survey, talk about what your survey would contain and how you would distribute it. So this is, and remember, you're not implementing this, you're just making a plan. Then you would identify barriers and bridges. So first you'd identify 2 to 3 bridges to this plan. And these are factors that make this plan feasible, like these examples. For a walking trail, maybe the first bridge is you know that the land for the trail that where you think it could go is not being used for anything else. And bridge 2 might be you've already found out that you've talked to a couple of people who own that land and they like the idea of having this walking trail. So those are bridges, things that might make it easier. If you're doing a farmer's market idea, maybe bridge 1 would be, oh, the owner of the gas station is a friend of yours who said, yeah, we can have it here. Maybe bridge 2, you've talked to at least 10 people who would be eager, willing to make special trips to the farmer's market to buy their vegetables there. And bridge 3, some local person has agreed to purchase any remaining vegetables for feeding your chickens, like if there's leftovers. So those are nice facilitating factors. Then identify 2 to 3 barriers or challenges in implementing this plan and include possible solutions. So the walking trail, we have one barrier. You're going to need to have some sort of funding because you have to have a walking surface or it's just going to be weeds and stuff. And the solution, well, you discover that there might be grant funding available for this. The second barrier, you're going to have to maintain the trail after it's built. So if someone has to go through it and kind of take out the weeds and overgrowth and make sure if it's a big rainfall that it doesn't wash out and stuff like that. And the solution that you've come across is you talk to the principal of a local school who says, oh, he'd like to have like a club of students who are doing volunteer work in the community, and this would be a perfect opportunity. So this is all your plan, and this is what you're basically doing for your project. You're just developing a plan. So the last thing is, how would you actually do it? What steps would you take? So you're going to determine what timeline will best be implemented in days, weeks, or months. So if you're creating a farmer's market, maybe the plan would have like weekly action, things you do each week. But if you're building a trail, it might be better to plan steps for each month. Depends on how fast things could happen. And then you want to write out at least 6 steps. For example, week 1, send survey out to all community members. Week 2, contact the landowners. Week 3, commit paperwork for the grant. So you would have to have at least 6 of these steps, but as many as you need to complete the project. So that's what you're doing for your work. And this is digging deeper into psychology. And this and the next one are very similar. And this is mostly a literature review process, going and finding out the research and answering some questions. So if you chose option 3, you're going to choose one of these questions. What is the relationship between psychology and heart or cardiovascular conditions? Some aspect of it. How do meditation, prayer, or other spiritual practices affect health? What psychological factors contribute to peaceful transition through the dying process? What can help people at that stage? How is the grieving process impacted by psychological factors when we've lost somebody? What childhood factors contribute to resilience to trauma and stress? So if any of those questions interest you, you would be contacting me to see if, to just talk to me about it so I know what you're doing. Then you might find some statistical information about your topic. Get that information from a governmental source, an appropriate source like National Institute of Mental Health or the Census Bureau, or it depends on what question you're answering. And then you're going to use the library to find 3 or 4 peer-reviewed psychology articles about this topic, not news articles, but research articles. And then you're going to follow, I said follow the template, but I've actually put it onto the next slide, how you're going to present your information. If you decided to do this one, Digging Deeper at Home, Navajo Health, this is what you would do. It's much the same as what you just did, but you were choosing an area of health on the Navajo Nation that you want to know more about, like a health challenge that Navajo people in particular face. Maybe related to diet or addiction or whatever you would know. And then you're following really almost exactly the same process as the previous one. Email me to get approval, use appropriate data source from a governmental agency, find the peer-reviewed articles, and then follow the instructions on the next slide. To present your results, you're going to make a PowerPoint presentation. You're going to have these slides. A title page. You're going to have a good title that clearly and concisely describes your topic. You will have already created this title because you have to submit an abstract. The change need. What health practice requires changing for you? Your rationale. Why does this plan require change? And make sure on this page that you use science-based sources, but these can be just our course content too. So if you learned about it in our course and you're using that to say why the change is needed, that's adequate. Baseline, describe where you were at baseline, including first, on this slide, you're going to talk about where you are on the trans-theoretical model of change. That's we got in the volition chapter. And then B, you're going to have a chart showing your baseline data, and I'll show this to you on the next page. You're going to then describe, on your next slide, describe your implementation plan. On slide 6, you're going to describe your process, how this was implementing your plan, including talking about the barriers faced and how you resolved them, and including what kind of support you secured for your effort. On slide 7, you're going to show and talk about your final graph. And on page 8, you're going to talk about maintenance. How are you going to keep this new habit alive? And then for all presentations, the last page will be a reference page in APA style. Some tips I have for PowerPoint slides. You're going to use short bulleted points that have only keywords, no paragraphs, no long sentences. You'll add information as you talk. And on slide, my second tip is I want you to include images and graphs, but just make sure that they're not just like pretty but irrelevant pictures. Make sure they have something to do or in some way help the content. That will be true for every presentation. And the next part is the presentation. So what would you do for the presentation? Well, you need to have at least these slides listed, a title page with a good title, a community need. You'd want to describe what the change was needed in your community. Your rationale, describe why this change would benefit health. And again, science-based sources, but this could include strictly information from our class. It doesn't mean you have to go get additional sources, but you might need to. So think about this as something that you take pride in, that you might actually go to your charter meeting and present to them. So how would you want to justify this project? Then your plan, what do you think could be done to resolve the problem? So first the need, then the plan. Then opinions, how are you going to find out what community members think about this? That's going to help build your case. Bridges, what things are making this possible. Barriers and solutions, describe that on a separate slide. And then just a slide with your timeline. And then don't forget, for all presentations, the last page will be a reference page in APA style. Your tips for good PowerPoint slides are you use just short bulleted points that include only keywords. Some people want to write big paragraphs on their slides, and that's not appropriate. What you need to do is talk about these bullet points. You look at the bullet point and then you tell what that bullet point is about. But don't write all that down. It's too wordy. People cannot read and listen to you at the same time. Short bulleted points that are clear. Someone would look at it and remember what point you made, but it doesn't write the entire point out verbatim. And then secondly, relevant images and graphs can be helpful to your presentation. So include those where they're helpful. Next, and for this talk, you're going to have, again, 8 slides plus the reference page, a title page, the question and why it interested you, your first source, what did you learn from your first source, including a citation, the same for source 2 and source 3, and then what other sources did you have? And you can present these however sequence you want to, but you need to present all of your sources. And then synthesis, how are you linking all these ideas together to answer the question? So what do you conclude based on all this information? Help the audience pull the information together. And then recommendations. What recommendations do you have on this topic? Do you have recommendations for things people could do? Or recommendations for more research that we should collect? What do you think? And then for all presentations, your last page will be your reference page. Tips for good PowerPoint slides: use short bulleted points with only keywords. Do not put sentences or long paragraphs. You put clear bulleted points that make sense and tell the audience what you're talking about and help them remember and help you remember, but then you talk about it. You're not writing it all out because your audience can't listen to both you and read what you've written. So that's my recommendation for that. And then use images or graphs that are relevant and helpful, not just strictly decorative. I mean, you can do a little bit with color, but try and find things that help. And that's for that presentation. I am coming up to tell you more information on submitting and a few other things at the end of these descriptions. And so this is no change from what I presented for the previous one. You're going to be describing, you're going to have a title slide, a slide where you answered your question and why it interested you. You're going to describe your sources, including citations. You're going to synthesize your ideas to answer the question and make recommendations about this topic. So you can look at the description in blue for the previous presentation, digging deeper into psychology, if that's helpful to you. And don't forget your reference page. The recommendations for the good PowerPoint slides are also to use shorter bulleted points that include the key words of what you want to talk about, but don't write all of it out. Save it so that you can talk about it, because your audience can't listen to you and read what you've written at the same time. Make sure the bullet points are enough information so the key point is made, but don't write the entire thing out that you would have to say about that point. This slide gives you detailed instructions on how to record your presentation. So it needs to be 10 to 12 minutes long, no more, no less, so you're going to have to practice. And that's part of your grading. The instructions here, I don't see that much point in talking you through them, because you're going to have to read them as you go through it. However, do make sure that you turn on the video so that your face is showing as you present. It'll show down in the corner of the screen. I am not doing this right now because I'm not presentable. That is to say, I haven't gotten myself in teacher mode, but for a presentation like this, you need to, dress for a presentation. So do so. And this should be clear, but if you have questions, let me know. I recommend this way of recording yourself because if you make a mistake, you can clear out one slide instead of having to start the whole presentation over. Then you have instructions for uploading to YouTube. Some people are concerned about this. They don't want to be publicly available, but I want to assure you that if you use the unlisted setting, the only people who can ever access your presentation are those who have the link. And the only people who have the link would be the people in our class. So hopefully you could feel comfortable about this. And of course, as soon as the class is over, you can remove it. Talk to me if you have any specific concerns. We now continue to talk about how to submit your assignments.